I pretended to elope with a stranger to trigger my controlling sister's panic attack at the family intervention. I'm 27 years old, male, and from a family where close really means we're going to micromanage every single thing you do until you snap. I'm the youngest with just one older sister, Nora, who's 32 and somehow thinks she's the family matriarch. She's always been that way, bossy, opinionated, and obsessed with how everyone else lives their lives. My mom is the quiet, go along to keep the peace type, and my dad is the crier. You know the type. Any disagreement turns into why are you tearing this family apart? I work in architecture, live 2 hours away in a small city, and I love my independence. I've built a life for myself. Good job. Nice apartment. No roommates. And I can finally breathe without someone checking my phone or commenting on my outfits. But apparently, that freedom makes me the problem child. Nora's convinced I'm wasting my life by not settling down with someone she would approve of, living closer to home, and basically living under her thumb again. They've done this family intervention thing more than once. That's what they call it. It's not dramatic like in movies, but it's just as calculated. They invite me for dinner, wait until I'm seated, then take turns expressing concern. Translation, ganging up to make me feel guilty until I agree to whatever they want. Last time it was Nora insisting I move back to help with our parents before it's too late. The time before that, it was a full-blown lecture about how I wasn't taking relationships seriously because I wasn't engaged yet. The last visit was when things really shifted. I'd left my phone on the counter while helping my dad cook, and Nora straight up read my texts out loud at the table. Nothing scandalous, just some flirty back and forth with a girl I'd gone on a couple of dates with, but that didn't stop her. She even added commentary like I was some reckless teenager. I grabbed my phone back and told her she wasn't my legal guardian. My dad started crying. My mom stared at her plate. Nora said I needed to grow up. After that, Nora called me and said, the family wanted to have a structured talk about my lifestyle the next time I came home. In her words, like, I'm some project they need to fix. That's when I decided fine. If they want drama, I'll give them a plot twist so wild, they'll never forget it. 2 weeks later, I met Blair. It was a Friday night, and I was at this dive bar with some coworkers after work. Blair rolled in on a motorcycle, all tattoos and gravel voice, but that smug confidence that either makes someone your worst mistake or best story. She sat near us and eventually started chatting with me. I don't even know why I told her everything, but I did. She listened. And then I said, half joking, you want to pretend to be my chaotic wife and crash a family intervention? She laughed so hard. She almost fell off her stool. Then she said, I've always wanted to play a soap opera villain. That's how the plan started. We decided we'd fake an elopement. Show up together, uninvited to the structured talk, and drop the news like a bomb. We made up a whole backstory. We met in Vegas, had a whirlwind weekend, and got matching tattoos. Blair even bought a fake ring off some sketchy online marketplace. We'd act disgustingly in love. My job was to look dreamy and say things like when you know, you just know. Her job was to smirk, wear leather, and say something inappropriate at the worst possible time. I told her we'd leave right after dropping the news and turn our phones off for the weekend. I booked myself a spa retreat in the mountains. No signal. No distractions. Just silence while they all stood in confusion. Blair was all in. She even practiced lines like I knew he was the one when he kicked that drunk guy in Vegas, and we were married by an Elvis impersonator. Felt right. I added glitter to my hair and found a white button-up shirt that looked just bridal enough to raise eyebrows. Day came. Hey, tame. We drove into town that morning. Blair was wearing a leather jacket, aviators, and had her helmet under her arm. I looked like I was floating on a cloud. We walked into my parents' house hand in hand. My dad's face froze. My mom stood up. And Nora, who had just started saying something about this conversation being important, got interrupted. I looked her dead in the eye and said, sorry. We're late. We just got married. Blair raised my hand and kissed the back of it like a cheesy movie villain. Dead silence. Not one word. No screaming. No questions. Just open mouths and wide eyes. I let it sit for a second, then said, we just wanted to share the news, but we won't stay. We have honeymoon plans. Then we turned and walked out. Blair and I didn't stop laughing until we were halfway down the highway. You said we barely made it 10 steps into the living room before the silence turned into chaos. At first, it was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, then my dad dropped the casserole dish he was holding. It shattered across the tile in slow motion. Green beans and glass spreading under the dining table. Nora's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her jaw moved like she was trying to form words, but couldn't pick which disaster to respond to first. She looked from me to Blair, then to our joined hands, then back to me. Her eye twitched. It actually twitched. I hadn't seen that happen since she lost a middle school spelling bee and claimed the judges rigged it. She finally spoke. Her voice came out loud and sharp like she'd skipped the warm-up rounds of anger and gone straight to the finals. She asked what we meant by married. Like, someone had just told her I robbed a bank in broad daylight. Blair didn't even flinch. She smiled, tilted her head slightly, and told the room we'd gotten married at a courthouse in Nevada. Very romantic, she added. Then she said we were thinking of moving to Costa Rica for a bit to reconnect with nature. My mother kept blinking. She wasn't speaking. Just staring between Blair and me like maybe this was a prank show and someone was about to yell. Surprise. You're on camera. Nora snapped out of it before anyone else. She jumped out of her chair and launched into one of her classic speeches. She called me impulsive. Said this was another example of how I'd never grown out of my rebellious streak. According to her, I'd always been this way, always chasing chaos, always making everything difficult for the family. Blair leaned over and whispered that she was getting real sitcom villain vibes, and I almost broke character. I decided to keep pushing. I told them we were thinking of having kids immediately, maybe twins if we got lucky, and that we were starting a travel blog to document the journey. Blair nodded and added that we'd already picked names, then winked at Nora like she was in on some private joke. To sell the story, we'd drawn fake tattoos on our ring fingers that morning using permanent marker. Mine had a little B in cursive and hers had my initial and a tiny heart. I made sure to flash my hand when I tucked my hair behind my ear. Nora spotted it instantly and went pale. She asked if we were serious if we'd really tattooed each other's initials after 2 weeks. Blair kissed the side of my forehead and told Nora that she could relax now. That she didn't need to take care of me anymore because she would. Nora looked like someone had knocked the wind out of her. She put a hand to her chest and muttered something about not again before sinking into a chair like she couldn't feel her legs. My uncle started yelling for someone to call an ambulance. He was convinced she was having a heart attack, but Nora waved him off and said she was fine, just caught off guard and maybe a little lightheaded. Blair offered to get her some water, but Nora waved her off too, still staring at the floor. My aunt stood up, slammed a hand on the table, and shouted that this wasn't funny. She called it a joke in bad taste and accused me of humiliating the family on purpose. I turned to Blair and said we were running late for our flight. She checked an imaginary watch and said we had just enough time to grab our bags and head to the airport. We walked out the same way we came in, hand in hand, past my dad kneeling on the floor, trying to pick up casserole shards. I could still hear my aunt yelling as we closed the door behind us. We got back into Blair's truck and peeled out of the driveway like we were on a mission. Once we turned the corner, we both burst out laughing. Blair said she hadn't had that much fun in years. I didn't check my phone until we were nearly halfway to the resort I'd booked. The second I turned it on, it lit up like fireworks. 39 texts, 12 missed calls, and a dozen voicemails. Nora's were first telling me to come back now, saying I'd lost my mind, demanding I explain myself. Then came the ones from my dad. His were more emotional. He begged me to please talk and to let him see me before we left the country. One of my cousins sent a long text threatening to cut me off for disrespecting Nora like that. Another said they'd always known I'd do something like this eventually. My mom didn't send anything. Not a text. Not a missed call. Nothing. Blair looked over at me and asked if I wanted to stop somewhere for ice cream. I tossed my phone into the glove compartment and told her that sounded perfect. We pulled off the highway and found a roadside diner with a neon cow on the roof. We sat in a booth, ordered the biggest sundaes they had, and clinked our spoons together. Meanwhile, back home, my family was apparently considering staging a second intervention, this time to reverse the damage. They didn't know the chaos had only just started. Day 2 of the disappearance, as my family was apparently calling it, started with pancakes and fake blog post drafts. Blair made breakfast in her usual loud, clumsy way, flipping pancakes too high, blasting music in the background. We brainstormed titles for our fake travel blog, jet lag, and matching tattoos won by a landslide. She even set up a site with photos from random beach stock images and wrote fake captions about our honeymoon in Cabo. My phone had been off since we left, but when I turned it back on to check directions for lunch plans, the messages started flooding in again. Missed calls, voicemails, guilt trap texts, and one cousin who texted Jordan, my best friend since college, asking if I was safe. Not worried safe, more like tell us where he is safe. Jordan didn't answer. He just forwarded the message to me with a note that said, your cousin is nosy. Around 2:00 that afternoon, Blair and I were lounging in my apartment watching a terrible dating show when Jordan called. He said my parents had shown up at his apartment building. They didn't make it past the buzzer, but he saw them standing in the parking lot arguing. Apparently, my dad was crying and my mom kept checking the car like she expected me to appear from behind it. I live across town. I wasn't even in the same zip code. About an hour later, someone buzzed my apartment. It was the pastor from our family church. She was holding an envelope and looking uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure why she'd been sent. I didn't answer the door. She eventually left the envelope by the door and walked off. I didn't open the door. A few minutes later, I saw through the peephole that she'd slipped something under the door and walked away. I waited until she left the building, then picked up the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten by my dad. Not typed, not printed, full on old school pen and paper. He'd written 5 pages. Most of it was about how much pain I was causing him, how Nora's health was fragile and how disappointed he was that I'd made such a big decision without including them. There was a line about how you used to be such a sweet boy and a whole paragraph about how Blair doesn't seem like the kind of woman who puts family first. I passed the letter to Blair. She read it twice and asked if she should grow a mustache to complete the villain look. Not even 10 minutes after that, my aunt messaged me saying Nora might need surgery. She didn't specify what kind. Just said the stress had brought back her old heart issues and that they were monitoring her closely. I didn't respond. I called my friend's sister who works as a nurse at the hospital Nora would have gone to. She checked. No emergency room visit. No hospital record. Nothing. They weren't worried about me being hurt. They were upset they couldn't manage the situation. That's when it clicked. This whole storm wasn't about love or concern. It was about control. I'd slipped out of their grip, and now they were throwing everything they had to reel me back in. I decided to meet my parents. Just them. No cousins. No siblings. No Blair. I picked a cafe in the middle of town. Public neutral ground. I gave them a time and made it clear the meeting would end if anyone else showed up. They agreed. They arrived right on time, but they didn't come alone. They brought a lawyer and a stack of annulment pamphlets. Actual printed brochures with titles like Legal Options After Impulsive Marriages and Starting Fresh. My dad slid them across the table like we were finalizing a loan. My mom sat beside him, arms crossed, watching me the way someone watches a ticking clock. I didn't even flinch. I smiled, thanked them for the reading material, and told them Blair and I were already planning a second wedding celebration in Costa Rica. We were going to have a beachfront ceremony with live music and floral archways, and I'd make sure their names were on the invite list. My dad just sat there blinking at the pamphlets like they were written in another language. I don't think he'd prepared for me to double down. I don't think he'd even processed the original announcement. He looked lost. My mom eventually cleared her throat and said something about how she loved me even if I made mistakes. She looked tired, not sad, not angry. Just like someone who was realizing none of this was going to end the way they'd hoped. I told them this wasn't about a real marriage or a fake one. It was about boundaries. I've been ignored, overridden, and steamrolled long enough. I said if they wanted any relationship with me, they needed to stop letting Nora speak for the entire family. No more group decisions about my life. No more interventions, and no more guilt tactics. Neither of them argued. They just stared. I stood up, paid for my own coffee, and walked out. Later that night, Nora called from a different number, screaming. Blair and I had just gotten back from dinner when my phone lit up. I answered, turned on the voice recorder, and held the phone away from my ear while Nora shouted that I'd ruined the family structure. Her words. She accused me of turning everyone against her, of using outsiders to destroy family unity, and of humiliating her in front of our parents. I didn't say a single word. Just let her vent until she hung up. I saved the recording then blocked her number. Now it's quiet. But that kind of quiet never lasts for long in my family. 2 days after I blocked Nora, 2 police officers showed up at Jordan's apartment. They asked for Blair by her full name. Jordan called me in a panic and we rushed over. The officers were calm but firm. They said a family member, Nora, had filed a wellness check. Her report claimed Blair might be mentally unstable and possibly manipulating me. She used phrases like emotional hostage and psychotic break. Blair opened the door wearing a hoodie, holding a mug of coffee, and looking completely unfazed. She offered them a seat and asked if they wanted anything to drink. I handed over my ID and calmly explained that nothing dangerous or illegal was going on. One of the officers seemed skeptical and asked to speak with me in private. She gently asked if I was safe, if anyone was pressuring me, and if I needed help. I told her our marriage was unconventional, but fully consensual. She asked a few more routine questions, then nodded and said they just had to verify some details to close the report. Blair chimed in and said our marriage was more of a symbolic ceremony, and that we planned to file paperwork soon. That was technically true. The ceremony never happened legally, but the officers didn't need that part. They left without incident, but said someone might follow up to verify documentation. We thanked them and watched them leave from behind the blinds. Less than 2 hours later, Jordan got called into his manager's office. Someone had been calling his workplace asking questions about his background and his shift schedule. He didn't get the full name, but the front desk said it was a woman with a family emergency who wouldn't leave a callback number. Jordan put it together instantly and warned me. I told him to give his manager a heads up that someone from my family might try to dig deeper, and he filed a complaint. Back at home, Blair pulled up her laptop and logged into a background check site. She'd worked in real estate a few states over and still had access through her brokerage. We ran her name, address history, and any public records clean, not even a parking ticket. Then she composed a formal-looking email with a report attached, addressed it to Nora, and sent it with the subject line, "Since you're so concerned." Later that evening, Blair got a text from an unknown number, just the word liar. She blocked it immediately. Then my cousin, Alan, reached out. He'd always been the calm one, the peacekeeper. We grew up playing hide and seek in the backyard and sharing snacks under the table at family weddings. I thought he was neutral in all this. His message was 4 paragraphs long. He called Blair dangerous, said my behavior was selfish, and told me I was still loved, but clearly lost. He ended it by saying I needed to repent and annul the disaster before it's too late. I didn't respond. I blocked him too. Blair and I figured it was time to shift focus. We booked a table at a rooftop restaurant downtown and invited only a few close friends, people who were already in on the joke. We dressed up, had dinner, clinked glasses, and handed a friend our phones to take some clean, well-lit photos. No captions, no geotags, no context, just a picture of us toasting, my hand on her chest, a sunset in the background. We posted 3 photos each on our profiles. That was all it took. Within an hour, my aunt messaged Jordan asking where the wedding reception was being held. My other cousin posted a vague Bible quote on her story. One of Nora's friends, someone I hadn't blocked yet, left a comment under Blair's photo that just said, "Unreal." We didn't reply to any of it. We just watched. By the next morning, I had 8 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. My dad tried once more. I didn't answer. I didn't plan to. Not until they stopped treating my life like a crisis and started treating it like it was mine. I stopped at a grocery store to pick up a few things and swiped my debit card. Declined. Tried again. Same result. I used a credit card instead and sat in my car, opening my banking app. My main checking account showed a temporary security hold. No transactions. No details. Just locked. That account was one I'd opened back in college. My parents had been co-signers originally because it came with better student benefits. I never thought twice about it since the account had worked fine, and I rarely interacted with the bank unless it was for routine transactions. Turns out, because the account still had their names listed as co-signers from my student days, which they were able to request a temporary hold by claiming they were concerned about financial fraud. The bank flagged it for account safety pending verification. After Nora told them I was unstable and possibly being manipulated, they called the bank and flagged it for his protection. I went straight to the branch the next morning. No appointment. Just walked in, gave them my ID, and asked to speak with a manager. I explained the situation and made it clear I was not in any crisis and had not authorized any freeze. The manager reviewed my ID, checked the account history, and saw the parental access. I shut the joint account down completely on the spot, transferred everything to my personal account, the one Blair and I had set up quietly a few weeks earlier. That account wasn't connected to any family members. No one but me had access. Luckily, I'd already transferred some money into it that week. Rent was due in 3 days, and I barely dodged a financial mess. Blair didn't even blink. She printed out a list of ways we could cut back on groceries and subscriptions just in case, like, she was already used to thinking 2 steps ahead. She joked that this felt like a survival challenge and started calling it budget month. After everything that had happened, I finally booked an appointment with a therapist. I didn't want to wait anymore. We talked for almost an hour. I told her the whole story from the fake marriage to the bank freeze. She listened without judgment. At the end, she looked at me and said, "You didn't just fake a marriage. You staged a rescue." That stuck with me. 2 days later, I noticed a couple of old friends from high school had unfollowed me on social media. I didn't think much of it until I saw a post Alan had shared. It wasn't about me by name, but it was obvious who he meant. He read a long message about how some people fall so far into self-destruction they pull others down with them and that true family will always try to intervene. But even if it looks harsh, his followers commented things like praying for healing and you did the right thing. At work, things got weird too. My manager called me into her office and asked if I had a minute. She didn't sound upset, just confused. She told me someone had sent an anonymous email to the department head claiming I was mentally compromised and potentially a liability to clients. She didn't share the message, but it had enough personal detail to raise eyebrows. I pulled up my performance reports, showed her my last project completion times, client reviews, and feedback scores, then I offered to take any evaluation she wanted. She shook her head and said it wouldn't be necessary. "Whoever sent that is clearly trying to sabotage you," she said. "You're not the one under review here." That night, Blair helped me look into reputation management services. I found one that specialized in personal attacks and digital cleanups. We scheduled a call. They helped me start a digital trail to protect myself, search filters, monitoring alerts, and steps to report coordinated defamation. As one final move, I posted a redacted clip from Nora's last voicemail online. I cut out names, removed location hints, and posted it on a subreddit focused on toxic family dynamics. The recording was only 30 seconds, but you could hear her screaming, accusing me of destroying the family, of saying I'd let a stranger corrupt my mind and that I was no longer one of them. I shared the clip anonymously on a subreddit focused on toxic family dynamics. The feedback was instant. People called the voicemail unhinged, disturbing, and controlling. The top comment said she sounds more like a dictator than a sister, and still no apology. Just silence from the ones who started all of this. 3 days before the fake engagement party, I got a message from Danielle, my ex-fiancée. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Her message was short, casual, and completely out of nowhere. She wrote, "So I guess I'll see you at the party?" I stared at my phone for a good 30 seconds before calling her. She picked up quickly, sounded a little unsure, and said she'd gotten an invite from my father. According to her, Nora had reached out and told her I was going through something and could really use someone from my past to bring me back to reality. Danielle wasn't the type to get involved in drama. When we broke up, it had been mutual, clean, respectful, and final. But Nora had apparently shown her old photos of us, told her I'd never really moved on, and convinced her I was having a manic spiral triggered by an unstable relationship. Danielle said she hadn't believed all of it, but admitted she thought maybe I just needed a familiar face. I told her clearly and without yelling that this party was a private event and she was absolutely not invited. To her credit, Danielle apologized and said she wouldn't come. But the fact that Nora had taken things that far, digging through old memories, rewriting our relationship, and feeding it someone from my past. It was a whole new level of messed up. We went ahead with the party. It wasn't a huge event. Just about 30 people. Mostly friends and coworkers who had watched this whole thing unfold in real time. The venue was a rooftop lounge decorated with white string lights and gold table runners. A friend brought cupcakes instead of a cake. Blair wore a dark green button-up shirt and joked about learning to dance just in case someone made a toast that required it. Everything was going smoothly. People were mingling, laughing, taking photos under the arch one of Blair's friends had built out of spare wood and fake ivy. Then halfway through one of the toasts, the elevator dinged. The doors opened and out walked Nora, my father, and Danielle. The room went quiet. You could hear the clink of a fork being set down. Blair was the first to react. She walked straight to the mic and said, "Well, we've got surprise guests. Let's welcome them to our little rebellion." People laughed nervously. Blair raised her glass like nothing was wrong and told everyone to keep dancing. Nora wasn't having it. She started shouting over the music, demanding I stop the performance and come to my senses. She talked about enrollments again, told everyone I was sick in the head, and said Blair was manipulating me for attention. It didn't matter that half the room already knew it was all staged. Still wanted to blow it up in front of everyone. My father didn't say anything. He just stood near the back, clutching his bag like he'd walked into a courtroom by mistake. Danielle looked like she regretted every step that brought her there. She didn't say a word the entire time. Just stood there, eyes wide, shifting her weight from foot to foot. One of our mutual friends had brought A+1 to the party. A man named Matt who turned out to be a local freelance journalist. He hadn't known anything when he arrived. But after watching the scene unfold and doing a quick search of my name afterward, he messaged me the next day. He said he wasn't trying to be pushy, but asked if I'd ever consider sharing what really happened. He called it the most quietly intense social story I've ever stumbled into. I declined the interview. I wasn't ready to go that public. But it was the first time I realized that the story wasn't just mine anymore. People were paying attention and not in the way no one had wanted. They weren't shocked by my choices. They were shocked by how far my family was willing to go to erase them. Later that night, after the last guest left and we were cleaning up, Blair sat on the couch and scrolled through photos. She stopped at one where I was laughing, cupcake in one hand, confetti stuck to my hair. Then she asked what happens when the pretend stuff feels more real than the family that raised you. I didn't answer. I just saved the photo. A week after the engagement party, I called it. The performance, the storyline, the noise, it had run its course. Even though we were still in control, it didn't feel like control anymore. Blair knew before I said anything. She sat me down one morning, slid over a cup of coffee, and told me I didn't owe her anything. Not a dramatic exit. Not a clean conclusion. Just a choice. Then she added, "You don't owe me an ending, but I think you need one." That afternoon, while I was out getting groceries, she packed up her stuff. No long goodbye. Just a sticky note on the fridge that said, "You don't need a partner to win a war, but you've got one if you ever want one." No signature. Just her usual smiley face and the drawing of a tiny motorcycle. I deleted all my social media, changed my number, and turned off everything for a while. I left town with no destination, just a week's worth of clothes and a rental car. I stayed in a cabin, walked trails, and cooked food that didn't come in takeout containers. I didn't check messages. I didn't call anyone. When I came back, I sent a text to my parents. It was one sentence. There was no marriage, but the betrayal was real. No one replied for a few days. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my Uncle Cam. I hadn't blocked him, mostly because he'd stayed out of the event. He told me Nora had flown to another state with her boyfriend and gotten married. No notice. No photos. Just a quick elopement. According to him, she told the family she wasn't letting anyone ruin her story too. Apparently, she wanted to prove something. She told people, "At least my marriage is real." Her boyfriend didn't know any of the backstory. They'd only been dating for 6 months. He thought it was spontaneous. He didn't know it was part of a rivalry. 48 hours after they returned home, he found out everything. Someone sent him the link to the wellness check report, the fake banking interference, even the audio clip from the subreddit. He read all of it. He asked her to explain. She called it family drama. He walked out the next morning. The fallout didn't stop there. That subreddit post had gone around enough to land in unexpected places. A listener mentioned it on a mid-sized podcast about family manipulation. Someone connected the dots and Nora's name got attached to it online. Her employer found out. A week later, they placed her on indefinite leave. No details. Just a quiet internal shakeup. I asked to be re-added to the family group chat, sent one final message I didn't ruin Nora. I held up a mirror, and then left the chat again. A year later, I live in a different city. New job, smaller apartment, but it's mine. I have limited contact with my parents, mostly surface level, like birthday texts or neutral holiday updates. I haven't spoken to Nora since the voicemail. She hasn't tried. I'm dating someone now, someone kind, steady, the sort of person who doesn't raise their voice to win. No fake backstory, no games, no strategy. Just quiet dinners, shared playlists, and slow weekends. Every now and then, I think about Blair. I still have the note she left stuck between pages in a book I never finished reading. And when I do think about her, I smile because not every fairy tale starts with love. Some start with fireworks, a fake ring, and just enough chaos to burn down the castle behind you.